if we go back in time, you will have noted that from 2014,
yes,
we have had a lot of efforts towards connecting all Kenyans to electricity. In 2014, the beginning, we did have about 2.3 million customers connected to electricity supply. And in 2018, the latest figures, which is just about a week ago, we had about 6.7 million customers. That translates to an additional 4.5 million customers, almost about 20 million households. So in a very short time of about 5 years, we have been able to more than triple the number of customers that we had in 2014. This initiative has not been without a lot of challenges.
yes,
But more importantly, the partnerships that we have created to achieve where we have reached so far is what we want to leverage on and ensure that by 2022 we will be able to connect everybody to the grid. In particular, most of the areas which have been connected since 2014 are in the grid areas. That is where electricity lines close the country.
yes,
But in the 14 counties that you have mentioned,
yes,
these are what we call the off-grid counties. Most of the electrification in those counties is done through what we call standalone generator sets.
okay,
And those are mainly in the concentrated areas of the off-grid counties. There are still quite many of the customers who are off those villages, what you would call the populous villages, and you find that there are people sparsely populated and occupying huge tracts of land, and they have not yet been connected to electricity. And that's our main concern, our main focus in the current program, which has led to what we are calling the National Electrification Strategy.
okay,
In those areas, it is not possible to extend the grid because it is far away.
okay,
Some of the areas are more than 1,000 kilometers from the nearest grid. And therefore, in order to ensure that those customers benefit more or less the same as those others who are in the grid areas, we want to put up what we call mini grids. Mini grids is an isolated power system within a small area, which serves a certain number of customers as per the inhabitants of that particular area.
okay,
Then we also have what we call solar home systems, which are mainly for nomadic people, those who keep moving from point A to point B, and whose electrification would create a challenge because you cannot be able to carry the electricity lines with yourself. So you would have to give them portable items like solar home systems so that once they move, they also move with those systems.
Okay, and you know, the World Bank did have some contradictory data on electricity access in Kenya, and we had targeted universal access first by 2020, and this was under the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the number of Kenyan households connected to electricity did increase from 36% in 2014 to 56% in 2016, according to the World Bank. So there has been progress, and like you told me a few minutes earlier, of course, now we've got even more of that chunk within that umbrella. But we've now gone to 2022, instead of 2020, which was initially set. So how realistic are these expectations in order to connect, especially these far-reaching areas? Like you say, the distances are an issue, portability is an issue. So what are some of the factors that affect realistically putting this in place by 2022?
Okay, first I want to make a correction.
Yes.
The universal access was envisaged to be 2030.
Yes.
If you go through the Vision 2030 blueprint, it was expected that by the year 2030, that's when we would achieve universal access. However, within our own thinking, and considering that Vision 2030 looks at making Kenya a middle-income industrializing nation, we realize that you need to industrialize so that you can achieve the middle-income status. And you cannot industrialize without electricity.
True.
Electricity, or energy for that matter, is an enabler which would facilitate the industrialization that will give you the middle income status. And you want to achieve the middle income status by 2030. So for you to be able to achieve that, you need to bring on board the electricity and energy solutions much earlier than 2030. And that is the thinking that brought us to revise from 2030
to 2022.
to 2022. 2020 was mainly in the grid areas where we have electricity
Yes, there were
lines.
Some specific
and which we are sure we would be
targets for 2020 as well.
in the grid connected areas.
Yes.
But because we have these other areas where you do not have the grid lines and where you have to apply an innovative solution and which we have already worked on. I talked about mini grids, isolated power systems,
yes,
using diesel combined with the solar, combined with wind, so that the solar and wind minimizes the amount of fuel that you have to use.
Okay, so as we
That is a mini grid for
yes,
densely populated villages within those areas in the off-grid. Then you have solar home systems, which applies to those areas which are extremely far away and there isn't any dense population.
Okay. So as you talk about that, of course, we know domestic customers that are supplied by electricity by Kenya Power did increase sixfold in the last decade.
Yes.
So there has been that progress. However, we've seen that large businesses that are connected to the electric grid declined by about 12.7%. So despite the domestic reach definitely increasing, we've seen a decline in the large businesses connected. And what do you think informs this decline then?
I think the decline is really not a matter within our jurisdiction. Because what we are saying is there were customers who were connected to electricity, there were industries. Of course, we would not have removed the lines from those industries.
Yes.
What would have happened is some of those industries, for one reason or another, may have closed down. But it doesn't mean that there is any change in the electrification. The supply is still available. And I think with the current focus of the government, the big four, you know, industries, manufacturing is one of the big four.
True.
With that focus, together with the rest of the other big four, that is universal health care, affordable housing, sufficient, or what we call ensuring that food and nutrition is sufficient for the Kenyans. When you look at all those big four agenda, you can see a lot of use of electricity in all of them. If you look at, for example, the food sufficiency, you can only be able to provide food if you produce enough.
Yes.
But producing is not enough. You still have to create storage, what we call preservation and conservation. If you have to apply conservation and preservation, which is necessary because there are times when we have more food than we need. There are other times when we have what we even call hunger, when we don't even have the foods. And the reason is because we are not able to levelize the distribution of the food. Because when we have excess, we do not have methods of preserving that excess so that you can use it during the times of shortages. So preservation, conservation, that is electricity. When you get to universal health care, the equipment you use, electricity. When you get to housing, affordable housing, You cannot talk about housing.
All the spheres of the Big Four agenda.
It touches on all those four Big Four agenda.
And as we talk about the President's Big Four agenda and what the President actually said about SMEs, which are 75% of the country's workforce, according to what he said, ERC has also revised downwards the cost of power for small businesses. In fact, this year's latest KPLC results, though, saw finance costs grow by 29.3%, and there was, however, there was a decline in profit by close to 63% as compared to 2017. So they have reduced the energy tariffs for SMEs. As you say, electricity touches across a broad range of these things to enable for us to go forward. However, KPLC is taking quite a hit in their profits, but still consumers are saying it's too high and they still want it even reduced. How do you solve that whole conundrum then?
I think what has been done so far is very commendable. There has been quite some significant reduction. And the efforts that we are putting in place in that electrification strategy partly embraces the methods and ways of still reducing the cost further and making it possible for the SMEs to operate in a way that they are competitive and they are attracted to because what competitiveness means is that we attract the SMEs, we attract the industries from other countries around us and bring them on board. And that's where we are looking at the region. We are not just looking at the prices here, we are looking at the comparative prices within the region. There has been very good efforts that have been made so far. We are not saying that that is all that we need to do. We need to do much more. And there is a balance. We have to create a balance. We've just talked about profitability.
Yes.
Although there are very many contributions, there are very many variables that, deal with that profitability, of which maybe one is what we are mentioning. I think we need to apply a balance so that at least these institutions in the sector have the financial health so that they can be able to provide adequate, reliable, and also competitively priced power. It's a balance.
Okay.
And we are working with the industries. For example, when we address the SMEs, we looked at the SMEs who are consuming electricity between 0 and 100 units.
Okay, yes.
And we realized it's about 90% of all the SMEs. And we thought if we did something about that huge percentage of the SMEs, what that means is we will be addressing a major component of the SMEs in terms of reduced prices. And those got a very significant reduction because it was a double-pronged reduction.
Yes.
First, it was about 12%, and then after that, it was about 30%.
Okay, now because of our limited time with one another on the show, I'm gonna ask you my final question. We have seen the 310 megawatt Lake Turkana wind power station, which is set to lower electricity by almost half, from 15 shillings per kilowatt per hour to 8 shillings for the same. So like we were talking a little bit earlier before we began, how does this impact energy operation costs, and how far has this plant progressed?
This plant is already feeding power into the grid, but you cannot look at it in isolation. That cost the 7.52 euros, which is about 9 shillings. It's 9 US, not US cents. It is Euro cents. Euro cents is slightly higher than US cents. So it's about 9. Now, that is just one power station.
Yes.
We have several power stations. And what we talk about when we are looking at the total generation cost is weighted average of all those generation plants. Then you have to transmit that power, you have to distribute it, and you have to retail it. All those operations means there has to be some resources injected so that you can be able to transmit, distribute, and retail. And therefore, you cannot look at that
in isolation.
You have to look at all the generators, put them together, get the weighted average, look at the cost of transmission, distribution, and retail, and then be able to determine what is it that will cost the customers in terms of the output of all those processes.
We've already seen a bit of a delay in that particular project, and cost has almost doubled to 28 billion, up from 15. So I suppose we will see how that, once you say all the positioning is in place, how it impacts the prices of electricity in the country. Thank you so much, Dr. Joseph Njoroge, for joining us today.
Thank you. But a collection, I don't think that is the figure. The figure is slightly much less.
Than 28.
Not just slightly, but it's not 28. But that is a 430 kilometers line all the way from Ologarani to Suswa. It is not just meant for that power plant. It is meant for other power plants which will come along the way. So it's really an investment which was funded by the government within the realization that it will add a lot of value in terms of tapping the resources, a lot of potential resources of geothermal, wind, solar along the way.
Okay.
So it is a very good project. So far it is running very well. What we normally call the number of hours that we are able to get the wind is